I smelled the storm before I heard the announcement crackle over the harbor speakers. Ferry to Saltmere, delayed. All passengers, please remain in the terminal. Typical. 3 hours stuck in a building that smelled like wet rope and diesel, all because the sky over the strait had decided to throw a tantrum. I shouldn't have even been here. I should have been back at the sanctuary, syringe feeding a half-drowned cormorant and pretending my life wasn't currently being threatened by a man in a $1,000 coat. That man was 40 feet away, arguing with a ticket agent in a voice built for boardrooms, not ferry terminals. Dorian Vesper. I knew the name the way you know the name of a disease you're trying not to catch. His company had spent the last year trying to buy the cliffs above my bird sanctuary to build glass-walled villas where nesting terns currently raise their chicks. I'd written him 4 letters as an omega running a sanctuary nobody important was supposed to take seriously. He'd never once written back. He just sent lawyers. So when I turned away from the departures board with my cooler case in hand, 3 vials of seawater samples, a tagged osprey feather, 2 months of fieldwork, and slammed directly into a wall of expensive wool and the unmistakable heavy weight of an alpha's presence, I didn't apologize first. "Watch where you're going," I snapped, already kneeling to grab the case that had skidded across the tile, my own instincts bristling at how close he was standing. "That's mine." I looked up. Of course it was him. Up close, his eyes weren't cold exactly. They were tired, in a way the glossy magazine photos never showed. His scent rolled over me anyway. Sharp cedar and rain, the kind of alpha pull I'd spent years training myself not to react to. Tired didn't make him less insufferable. "It's not yours, it's mine," I said, snatching the handle, my chin lifted, refusing to let him loom. "Open it." "Excuse me?" "Open it," he said again, quieter, which was somehow worse than shouting, "because the case in my hand right now has your name nowhere on it, and the one in yours is identical to mine down to the scuff mark on the corner." I looked down. He was right. Same brand, same gray case, same dented corner, and when I clicked the latches and lifted the lid, my stomach dropped. No seawater vials, no feather. Instead, a thick folder stamped Vesper Holdings, Confidential, a child's drawing of a sailboat folded in quarters, and a single photograph that slid loose and landed face up on the floor between us. It was me. From 3 weeks ago, standing in the clinic doorway with a girl wrapped in a thermal blanket, her face turned half away from the camera, a seabird sticker on her cheek where I'd put it to make her smile. Dorian didn't move. He didn't blink. The color simply drained out of his face like someone had pulled a plug. "Where?" he said, his voice cracking down the middle, his alpha voice cracking down the middle. "Where did you get that picture of my niece?" "I don't know your niece," I said, even as my pulse climbed into my throat, my omega instincts screaming at me to back away from the grief rolling off him in waves. "I treat people who wash up half-drowned. I don't ask for names." "Her name is Iris." His hand was shaking when he picked up the photograph, like it might dissolve if he held it too hard. "She's been missing for 31 days. We were sailing back from Hollow Point when the storm hit. The boat rolled. When the Coast Guard pulled me out, she wasn't in the water with me. They searched for 2 weeks and found nothing but her life vest." I felt the floor tilt under me in a way that had nothing to do with the ferry delay. 3 weeks ago, a fishing trawler had radioed my sanctuary's emergency line. A girl found shivering on the rocks below Hollow Point. No ID, barely conscious, refusing to give her name to anyone but me because I was the one who'd carried her up from the tide line. We'd logged her as Jane Doe. Child Services had been notified. She'd been transferred to a county shelter within 48 hours, and I'd been too buried in osprey season to follow up. "She's safe," I said quietly. Or she was, 3 weeks ago. Dorian's knees nearly gave out. A billionaire alpha with a fortune built on glass and concrete, and he looked, for one unguarded second, like a man who'd just been handed his own heartbeat back. I caught the shift in his scent too, the sharp cedar softening into something raw and unguarded, an alpha's composure cracking wide open in the middle of a public terminal. "Take me to her, right now. I don't even know if she's still at that shelter. Records move people around." Then we find out. He was already reaching for his phone, his voice snapping back into the boardroom register, the cracks sealing over almost as fast as they'd appeared. "I'll charter a boat, whatever it costs." I should have told him to wait, to let the proper channels handle it, to call child services himself and let me get back to my birds. Instead, I heard myself say, "There's a coast road, faster than waiting out this storm for a boat." He didn't even ask why it was offering. He just said, "Then we drive," and walked toward the exit like the decision had already been made days ago. I followed, telling myself I was only doing it for the girl, not for the way his presence had settled something restless in my chest the moment he stopped looking like a threat and started looking like a father. It was in the parking lot while he argued with a rental agent about insurance when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. No name, no caller ID, just 6 words that turned my blood to ice water. "Stop looking. Some things stay lost." I deleted it before I could think better of it, and told myself it was a wrong number, a prank, nothing. But my hands didn't stop trembling the whole drive to the car, and when I glanced in the side mirror, I could have sworn the same gray sedan that had been idling near the ferry dock pulled out of the lot 2 cars behind us. I didn't say anything to Dorian. Not yet. Some instincts you trust, others you bury, because admitting them out loud makes them real. The coast road hugged the cliffs for 2 hours, salt spray needling the windshield every time the wind shifted. Dorian drove like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts, too fast on the straights, silent on the curves. I spent most of the ride pretending to check messages so I wouldn't have to explain why I kept twisting around to look at the road behind us, and why being shut in a car with an anxious alpha for 2 hours straight had my own nerves stretched thin in a way that had nothing to do with the mystery sedan. The gray sedan never reappeared. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. We stopped first at my sanctuary, not for birds, because my logbook lived there, in a battered filing cabinet that smelled like brine and 10 years of bad coffee. Dorian stood in the doorway of my clinic like he'd wandered into another species' habitat entirely, watching my grandmother's old assistant, Tobias, hand-feed a one-winged gull at the counter. I noticed the way Tobias straightened a little, instinctively deferential to the alpha filling up the doorway, even though Tobias had never once deferred to anybody in his life. "This is where you brought her," Dorian said. Not a question. "This is where I bring everyone who washes up half dead." I pulled the filing cabinet open. "Hollow Point intake log, 3rd week of last month, should be right." My fingers stopped on an empty folder. Not missing pages, a missing folder. The metal tab still labeled in my own handwriting, the contents simply gone. "That's not possible," I muttered, flipping through the drawer twice, then a 3rd time, my pulse climbing. "I filed this myself. I remember the smell of her wet clothes when I logged it." Tobias looked up from the gull, frowning. "Someone called here, actually, about 2 weeks back, said they were from county services, wanted the Jane Doe file faxed over for transfer records. I didn't think twice, happens all the time." "Who called?" Dorian's voice had gone flat and dangerous in a way I hadn't heard from him yet, his alpha tone dropping into something that made even Tobias take half a step back. "Didn't get a name, sounded official enough." Tobias shrugged, oblivious to the way the air in the room had changed. "Why? Something wrong?" Everything was wrong. County services didn't request paper files by phone. They had a portal, a process, a dozen redundant safeguards I'd complained about for years. Somebody wanted that file gone quietly, and they'd wanted it gone before anyone came looking.
I thought about the text message still sitting, deleted but not forgotten, somewhere in my phone's memory. Stop looking. Some things stay lost. Dorian, I kept my voice low so Tobias wouldn't hear the tremor in it. Does anyone else know you're chartering boats and asking around about Iris? Anyone close to you? His jaw tightened. My business partner, my lawyer, a handful of board members, they've been managing the company while I've been searching. He paused, and something flickered behind his eyes, quick and unwelcome, like a thought he didn't want to finish out loud. Why? Because somebody didn't want this file found, and they knew exactly which file to ask for.
Outside, gulls screamed over the rocks, and for the first time since the ferry terminal, Dorian Vesper looked less like a grieving uncle and more like a man realizing the storm that took his niece might not have been weather at all.
We reached the county shelter just as the storm finally broke into a thin gray drizzle. The administrator, a tired woman named Constance, pulled up the transfer record on her screen and frowned the exact same frown Tobias had given me an hour ago. Jane Doe, age 9, intake 3 weeks back, transferred out 11 days ago, private placement, pending kinship verification. Kinship verification? With who? Dorian's knuckles were white on the edge of her desk, his presence so commanding the front desk volunteer had gone quiet just from standing near him. A family friend, Constance said, scrolling. Name listed is Marcus Farrow. Paperwork says he's the girl's legal guardian's business associate, authorized to facilitate a reunification once identity was confirmed. The name hit Dorian like a physical blow. Marcus arranged this. You know him. It wasn't a question. He's my partner, co-founded the company with me 12 years ago. He's the one who told me to keep searching the northern coves. He's the one who said the southern shelters had already been checked. The pieces didn't fit together cleanly yet, but they were starting to form an ugly shape. A man who'd quietly steered the search away from the one shelter where Iris actually was. A man with the authority to pull a file by phone and have nobody question it. A man who, Dorian admitted under my questioning, had been pushing hard for months to buy out Dorian's shares. Shares Dorian wouldn't sell while Iris was still missing and the company's future undecided. But shares a grieving, distracted Alpha might finally let go of once he had nothing left to fight for. Where is she now? I asked Constance, my stomach twisting. Address on file is a property out past Thistle Point, lease signed under Farrow's name. Constance turned the screen so we could both see it, and something tightened behind Dorian's eyes, fast and cold. That's not a house, he said quietly. That's company land. Undeveloped. There's nothing out there but the old lighthouse keeper's cottage.
We were back in the car within minutes, the drizzle thickening into real rain again, the wipers struggling to keep pace with both the storm and my racing thoughts. I kept picturing Iris on that beach, the seabird sticker, her small fingers gripping my sleeve and refusing to let go. And now, picturing her, instead, locked away in some forgotten cottage by a man who'd spent a decade pretending to be her uncle's closest friend.
Beside me, Dorian's scent had turned sharp and bitter with fury, and Alpha's instinct to protect his own curdling into something close to violence. And for once, I didn't feel the urge to put distance between us. I felt the urge to stand beside him. If he's kept her hidden, I said carefully, what does he actually want? Money won't matter if she's found and the truth comes out. Dorian's hands tightened on the wheel until I heard the leather creak. Then maybe, he said, he's been counting on her never being found at all. The headlights swept around a bend, and ahead of us, half swallowed by fog, a thin beam of light blinked on and off from somewhere near the old lighthouse. Once, twice, then nothing.
We left the car at the tree line and walked the last stretch on foot, rain needling sideways off the cliffs. The cottage windows glowed faint and yellow, and through one of them,
just for a second, I saw a small shape move past the glass. Quick, careful, the way a child moves when she's been taught not to be seen. Dorian froze beside me, every muscle in his body coiled tight, his alpha instincts straining against the leash she'd kept on them for 31 days. That's her. Wait! I caught his sleeve before he could charge the door. If Marcus is in there and he sees you coming hot, we don't know what he does next. Let me go first. He doesn't know my face is connected to any of this yet. Not really. And nobody braces for an Omega walking through the door. It was a thin plan, and we both knew it. But grief makes people reckless, and I'd rather be the reckless one than watch him be. The door was unlocked. Inside smelled like kerosene and old dust. Marcus Farrow sat at a small table, a satellite phone in front of him, his expression sliding from surprise to something far colder the moment he recognized me from the photograph he'd clearly seen before. "You're the wildlife Omega," he said slowly, "the one from the sanctuary letters. And you're the man who's been telling Dorian to search the wrong coves for a month." I kept my voice level, even as my heart hammered. "Where is she?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Iris stepped out from behind a curtain, thinner than I remembered, but alive, her eyes finding mine with a flash of recognition that nearly broke me in half. "Bird Lady," she whispered.
Behind me, the door slammed open. Dorian's restraint had lasted exactly as long as it took him to hear his niece's voice. Marcus rose fast, knocking the satellite phone to the floor, and for one terrible second, I thought he might bolt for the back door with Iris still between us.
"It was never about the money," Marcus said, backing towards the window, his voice cracking with something that almost sounded like brief of his own. "You stole a month of her life," Dorian said, his voice shaking with a fury that filled the whole cottage, and Alpha's rage finally let off its chain. Iris didn't wait for the adults to finish. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and threw her arms around me, burying her face against me the way she had on that beach 3 weeks ago. "You found me again," she said. Outside, headlights swept across the cottage windows. Constance had alerted the county sheriff the moment we'd left her office, and red and blue light now washed over the dripping trees. Marcus didn't run. He just sat back down, slowly, like a man finally setting down something he'd been carrying too long.
The weeks after Thistle Point blurred together in statements to the sheriff, lawyers untangling 12 years of partnership into something that could survive a betrayal, and a little girl slowly remembering how to sleep through a full night without waking up checking the door. Marcus didn't fight the charges. I think some small part of him had wanted to be caught long before headlights ever found that cottage. I went back to my sanctuary the day after Iris was officially returned home, because the birds didn't know there'd been a crisis, and a one-winged gull doesn't care who's grieving, it just wants its fish on schedule. I told myself that was the end of it. A strange month, a stranger alpha, a story I'd tell Tobias for years, and nothing more. Dorian showed up 4 days later anyway, soaked from the walk up from the dock because he'd refused to wait out the tide for the proper landing. He found me elbow deep in a bucket of sardines. "I came to write you a check," he said, "for everything. The records, the drive, the cottage. I owe you more than I can put a number on, so I'm going to try anyway. I don't want your check. I didn't even look up from the gull. I didn't carry a half-drowned kid up a cliff for a payout, and I didn't drive 2 hours through a storm hoping for one either. I know." He almost smiled, the real kind, not the boardroom kind. His scent had softened around me again.
warm cedar instead of sharp, the way an alpha settles when he's finally somewhere he trusts. What he meant, it turned out, was 3 acres of undeveloped company land above Hollow Point, the same cliffs his villas had once threatened, quietly rezoned and deeded over to the sanctuary before I'd even agreed to anything. No ribbon cutting, no press release, just a folder of paperwork left on my clinic counter with a sticky note that read, "No pressure." The Turns needed a lawyer more than I needed a view. Iris started visiting on weekends not long after, scrubbing seabird enclosures in rubber boots 2 sizes too big, declaring herself assistant bird doctor with a seriousness that made Tobias laugh until he wheezed. Dorian came with her every time, even after the drive stopped being necessary, until eventually it wasn't really a drive at all. It was just coming home. He asked me eventually, standing on those same reclaimed cliffs with the Turns wheeling overhead and Iris pretending not to watch us from the rocks below. I felt it the way every Omega is supposed to feel it and never quite believes will happen to them, that settling, that certainty, and I said yes before he'd even finished the question. We bonded that spring in a ceremony small enough to fit on the cliffside, just sanctuary staff, Iris in a flower crown she refused to take off for 3 days. People ask me sometimes if I regret slamming into a stranger's suitcase in the ferry terminal that day. I tell them the storm was going to roll in either way. The only question was ever going to be what the tide dragged back in with it. And for once, in a life spent pulling broken things out of the water, the tide brought me something whole. Looking back now, I think about the man I almost refused to even look in the eye that day at the terminal, the alpha I'd already decided was selfish and cold before he'd said a single word to me. I was wrong about him in nearly every way that mattered, and I've learned since then that the loudest story in someone's life is rarely the true one. The real one is always quieter, and you only find it if you're willing to stay long enough to listen.
Thank you so much for watching till the end. I hope this story warmed your heart the way it did mine while writing it. If you enjoyed this one, please hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow. Let me know in the comments what was your favorite moment in the story. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. See you in the next one.